Now, I've done a few videos in the past about Overwatch esports. I did one about Overwatch Collegiate with Paz, I did one about Overwatch Contenders, focused on how chaotic and messy that league was, and I had planned on doing an Overwatch League video, but it didn't seem like there was much enthusiasm for it as a member's choice topic, and then the Overwatch League collapsed, so that kind of fell apart. However, I think these videos have kind of overlooked something that's becoming more and more of an obvious issue, at least to me. Like, the Overwatch League wasn't meant to just be for, just esports nerds. From day one, the Overwatch League was meant to be a swing at getting esports into the mainstream. It was replicating the model of traditional sports leagues like the NHL with city-based teams, regional divisions, a regular season followed by playoffs, all that good stuff. The problem here is a key question. Can Overwatch even be a real competitive game like those sports? I mean, esports is always going to be different from sports, that's not what I'm talking about here. But I think that there's also a question worth asking about whether the problem with Overwatch and the Overwatch League is based purely on some, issue with management, or if there's something bigger causing these issues. And not just for professional esports with Overwatch either. The title of this video is Competitive Hero Shooters Were a Mistake, and that very much so applies to the latter as well. I want to talk about why Overwatch in particular, and games like it in general, don't work as a serious competition, and why that's not something they should be trying to fix. Part 1. The Mercy problem. Now hold on, I'm going somewhere with this. This is not just trashing on Mercy or Mercy mains, and I will explain myself here. Mercy has been a controversial hero in Overwatch pretty much since day one, whether it was in terms of the power of mass res, her damage boost, her flight, or the relative lack of mechanical skill required to play her. The people who play her are incredibly defensive about it, in large part because Mercy and the people who play her are regularly the topic of the dumbest discourse in this community. It's an incredibly lazy punching bag, and honestly I don't really have a great deal of respect for people who have nothing to offer the community except trying to get clicks off of trashing on Mercy. And look, there are a lot of reasons why this problem exists, but for our purposes, the Mercy problem is more systemic. It's not what Mercy does, it's what the crack in the competitive armor that she exposes. Namely, that what it means to play a hero shooter is inherently very broad, and most people only understand and experience their very narrow side of it, which makes it miserable as a competitive game. Whenever you're playing a team sport, you have to be able to conceptualize what your teammates are doing, why they're doing it, and how you can work with it. By the same token, you also have to be aware of what your opponents are doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and what you can do about it. With most competitions, the inherent limitations of human ability in the real world are what make this pretty possible. A soccer player isn't trying to remember that one of his teammates can time travel, and a hockey player doesn't get confused about whether her goalie can create fake pucks to trick the other team. If you're playing football, it is fully possible to grasp what every position on the field is meant to do and how to do it. When I played hockey, I was a defenseman the entire time. I can count on one hand the number of full games I played in any other position, and I was very much so only good at being a defenseman. But I still understood what the forwards were doing on both teams, and the goalies. I knew where the other team's forwards would be, I knew where my team's forwards would be, and I would be able to adapt my gameplay to match them. When the puck was in my end, I knew how to fall back, defend my goalie, what they needed from me. And this is pretty common in sports. You need to not only know your own position, but know enough about all of them to understand how to play your position properly. Think of it like how a drag race queen doesn't necessarily have to be good at every single talent in order to win the crown, but they still know the importance of them and what a good versus bad lip sync or runway or impersonation is. Sports are not the only kind of competitions out there that we can or should compare Overwatch to. Drag race is a competition. Chess is a competition. Rock, paper, scissors can be a competition. For a lot of the best competitions out there, you need to be able to understand all the mechanics at play, not just your own narrow branch of it. Even within the context of a competition that has a very wide range of things expected from you, this is still possible. Different drag race contestants bring different skill sets, abilities, talents, and specialties, but the core mechanics at play are still fundamentally understandable by everyone, and the competition is based around meeting the criteria for that specific week's challenge, or, failing that, being able to deliver a really good lip sync for your life. This isn't just important for contestants if you're competing in it, but also for the audience. When I'm watching Mirage Amuro's talent show where she gets yanked forward by an imaginary dog into a strut,
I put your man in a leash, cause all men are dogs.
Or when I'm watching an Icha versus Marsha in a lip sync for your life to Doja Cat's Boss Bitch, or when I'm watching Denali absolutely kill it in her verse for Phenomenon, I know what that fundamentally means within the context of this competition. Someone else might do it differently, someone else might do it better, they might do it worse, and I know where that fits within the spectrum of the competition. When I watch a defenseman take a solid slap shot from the blue line and pick that fucking top corner like an apple, or I see a forward juke out a defenseman on a breakaway, or when I see a goalie flopping around like a chicken with its head cut off, or I see a winger cherry picking a defenseman who hasn't noticed him, I know what that means, whether I'm playing in that game or I'm watching it. When I talk about the Mercy problem, I'm talking how you can't do this in Overwatch. This problem isn't unique to Mercy, but she is the most prominent example of it because of the discourse that surrounds her at all fucking times. For people who play Mercy, they understand the impact she has, why it takes skill to play her well, the difference between being a good and bad Mercy, all that stuff. However, Mercy's playstyle, skills, and perspective on the game are pretty fundamentally unique, and for people who don't play her, it's really easy to just not be able to see the world from that perspective. Obviously, it's often being done in bad faith, we're not going to pretend that these are all good faith, but just misled. But even in good faith, it's really hard to be able to conceptualize all these different diverse playstyles in a meaningful way. If you've got a team with Ana, Mercy, Winston, Ashe, and Reaper, you've got 5 people playing this game in entirely different ways, and, this might shock you, that's not actually ideal for a competition. It is great for a fun game, don't get me wrong, but trying to turn it into a competitive scene is always going to be a mess because it's so hard to actually understand what everyone's doing and why. Not just on your own team, but also on the other team. In an Overwatch game, between your team and the other team having 10 heroes across 3 roles, you could probably have millions of different 10 hero lineups in a given match. And that's before even getting into maps and game modes. We'll get into that more later. Not only that, but it is never going to be static. There's nothing permanent. Balance changes mean that you're not only dealing with nearly 40 different heroes with different kits, but also you have to try and keep track of whether their gun does 5 or 6 or 5.5 damage per bullet, because that might be the difference between winning and losing. The Mercy problem is that you might be objectively very good at this game, but have fundamentally no understanding of how Mercy works, why she works, how to beat her, how to enable her, and that goes for most heroes. Most heroes in a hero shooter like Overwatch have a really unique kit, which means wildly divergent playstyles that aren't inherently intuitive. Even when they're theoretically filling a similar role, they're still going to be different. 2 different people might play right wing differently in hockey, or play quarterback differently in football, and 2 different people might interpret a runway challenge differently on Drag Race, but they are still fundamentally playing right wing, or playing quarterback, or creating and presenting a look. 2 different people might play support in Overwatch and be functionally playing different fucking games. And then there are the other team's 2 supports who might also be playing the game entirely differently, and then the 4 DPS in the match and the 2 tanks who are also experiencing the game entirely differently. The reason this is a problem is because it makes it impossible to create a competitive environment at all levels, and it's not clear what it means to be good at the game at all to an audience or to other players. You might suck at hockey, but you can still tell the difference between a good and a bad hockey player, and there's a way to draw the line there. You might suck at football, but you don't need to be good at it to tell if someone threw or caught the ball pretty well. You might have never so much as put on a wig, but you can still tell when a queen is delivering a good lip sync. That isn't the case with a hero shooter where there's so much going on, so many diverse kits, divergent kits, that people can't develop a proper understanding of the jobs everyone's doing and what it means to do them well, or not do them well, whether they're spectating or playing. You might have a million hours on Ana. That doesn't mean you understand how Mercy works, how to play Mercy, and that's not a bad thing. That's not saying that you're bad at the game. At least, I don't think it is. But is it? However, you might be thinking about other games where a lot of this is true that aren't hero shooters that do work as competitive games, or even some games that are close enough to serve as a counter-argument, and I want to address where I think a hero shooter like Overwatch becomes unmanageable as a competitive game. Part 2. The game changes. One of the things that makes Overwatch uniquely bad as a competitive game is that it is way too fluid. What it means to win an Overwatch game changes depending on the mode and depending on the map within that mode, and the process of getting there changes depending on the heroes you pick, depending on the heroes you swap to and when, and so much more. If you look at League of Legends, there are a ton of champions with different kits and items that they can buy that would be useful for them and all that stuff. If you look at Valorant, there are similarly agents with unique abilities and skills. If I'm arguing that Overwatch is a bad competitive game, not even all hero shooters, just talking about Overwatch, how do I square that with saying that those are generally pretty okay competitive games? The answer is that a good competition has consistency in terms of the rules of the game and the arena you play it in. In sports, the arenas or fields or pitches are regulated at least to some degree. Like, there might be variation from one to the next, but in terms of the functional purpose that they're serving, they will be built similarly and will serve a similar purpose in a similar way. Beyond that, the game itself is always going to be consistent in terms of the objective and how to win it, or at a bare minimum, they're not shifting very often. New rules might get added to a sport every now and then, but it's not happening on the fly. You're not getting a mid-season patch. You're never going to rock up to your baseball game only to end up playing rugby on a hockey rink. You will play baseball on a baseball diamond every time you go play baseball. For some competitions, there is a lot of variety, but it's self-contained. Reality TV competitions like Survivor typically do this sort of thing where you have to complete a challenge that might change from season to season, but that's deliberate. Survivor at its core is a social game, and it wants you to focus on the social game and the politicking that goes on at camp, and the challenges are just kind of a frankly, supplementary thing to that. Changing up the challenges also means that you can't just rely on being super strong to win the game. Even if you are a challenge beast who never loses a challenge, if your social game sucks ass, you're not walking away with $1 million because no one will want to give it to you. Drag Race might ask queens to write and record a verse for a song in one episode, but then ask them to make a high fashion garment out of shit from the dollar store. But both of those are testing skills that the show is asking its contestants to demonstrate if they are truly the next drag superstar. And if they're bad at one thing, that's fine. You can always save yourself with a lip sync for your life, which means that one of the staples of drag as an art form is always the thing you can eventually be tested against. League of Legends, despite the huge number of champions, only has one map and one mode in terms of its main competitive scene. Every match of League of Legends will take place on Summoner's Rift, which will always have the same layout of lanes, jungle, turrets, inhibitors, hiding spots, monsters, and nexuses. Also, while there are a lot of champions, there is no swapping mid-match. Hell, you're even told explicitly up front which champions on both teams will be in which positions before the match starts. You know what you're up against and what they'll probably be doing. If you played the game enough, you know what Evelynn in jungle is doing and how she's building. And you know that a set who's built for top lane is going to be played differently than a set who's being played as a support and what you do about that. If you pick Ezreal, you're stuck with that little twink no matter how bad their Seraphine beats his ass like a drum, and you are just going to have to deal. With With Valorant, the abilities are distinct, but the weapons are not. They're standard across all agents, and while the maps change, the mode doesn't. Even if you aren't super familiar with a particular map, you know how the mode works, and you're even given the names of every single area of the map so you can still engage with callouts and understand what's going on. Overwatch is a nightmare of a game for a competitive scene because everything is constantly changing. I'm not even talking about balance changes here, I'm talking about the fundamental objective of the game being a coin toss every time you queue up. Payload, Hybrid, Flashpoint, King of the Hill, and Push are all wildly different game modes, except for Payload and Hybrid, obviously, but still pretty different, and they are all grouped under the same banner of competition, and that's before even considering the maps themselves changing. A match on Numbani is a fundamentally different match than one on New Queen Street, but it's also still fundamentally different from one on Hollywood, even though they're in the same mode. And the fact you don't know what game you're playing when you queue up isn't good for a competition. Can you imagine if there was a real-world sport where you might randomly get dropped into one of 5 different types of sport every time you showed up, but you're only playing that one sport at a time? And also, you would be playing it in an entirely different facility with different structures and shit every time. That's before even getting into hero swapping, because have fucking fun with that. Your 10-man game of Overwatch might see 20 heroes played across it, and you've just got to deal with that shit. In terms of facilities and stuff, the closest you can kind of get to this in real-world sports is shit like golf or F1, where the courses change up when they move around. But even then, there's a lot of other things constraining it and keeping it comprehensible and competitive. For one, nobody's going to be surprised with which golf course or F1 track they're competing on. Like, it's not like queuing up for ladder and rolling the dice on the map or mode. For another, there really aren't that many ways to play a golf course or an F1 track differently from person to person. It's about doing this just better than the others. You might take a different approach to some extent, but it's not like Mario Golf or Mario Kart where you're taking shortcuts and using star power and shit. The reason why this matters is that consistency is key to any sort of serious competitive system for both participants and spectators. Overwatch doesn't do that. I mean, from a spectator perspective, especially if you aren't very familiar with Overwatch, it just looks like a disaster. It's a complete mess to watch. Even if you are familiar with Overwatch, trying to keep track of what's happening in a team fight is a disaster. You're really just relying on hopefully some very good commentating. But then when it comes to the map and the mode, the rules change dramatically from match to match without any player agency, and when it comes to hero swapping, players are given so much agency that it makes it impossible to say anything definitive about what kind of game you're playing. To be clear, this is part of what makes it very fun to play and watch casually, especially if you're very good or you're watching someone who's very good. Like watching a drag show and seeing an amazing performer just absolutely kill it, or strap on your skates, shoot the puck around with a friend, or just like throw a baseball around with your dad. It's not competitive, it's just fun. None of this is to say that Overwatch and games like it can't be good fun games, just that trying to make them competitive is a mistake because it's not the type of game this is. Anyways, I don't want to get ahead of myself with the conclusion, so let's just get one final section out of the way. Part 3. Consistent Skill Tests. If you've been following the sports analogy, you might have been thinking that Overwatch is like one kind of sport, namely like a biathlon or a triathlon. This isn't really the case for Overwatch as a whole in terms of ladder, but it is kind of similar to how the Overwatch League and most formalized competitive scenes run. A biathlon will test your skiing and your shooting, and a triathlon will test your running, swimming, and cycling, none of which are really connected. You know, you do one, then you do the other. Similarly, an Overwatch League match would involve playing one map in each mode for the most part. And that would be a fair point, except you're forgetting that these are a combination of very specific consistent skill checks, not fundamentally different rules each time you compete. Biathlon is very specific. You're not just getting to go wild with a gun. With triathlon, you run a certain part of the track, you swim a certain part of the track, and you cycle a certain part of the track. You don't get to like choose how much of each one you want to do. There's not flexibility in that. It's very rigid. It is a competition based on that specific thing, and everyone is doing the same thing. Even in Overwatch League, maps still change from match to match depending on which ones the teams pick, and that doesn't make it consistent. This begs the question of what does it mean to be good at Overwatch, like on a fundamental level? Like, are you good if you can pop off on Widow and nothing else? What does that mean for you if you're on a map, or even just a point within a map where Widow sucks? If you're good at Genji, but only with an on your team, are you good at Overwatch? If you're good at Sombra, but only if the other team is running a specific comp, are you still good at Overwatch if they stop running that comp? This could honestly become a whole own video at some point, because I could go on about what makes you good at Overwatch for ages, but for now, we've got to keep it on topic. For something to be a serious competitive environment, there needs to be some sort of consensus about what it means to be good at it, at a fundamental level. Like, no two hockey players are identical in terms of their own individual thought processes, or skills, or physiques, or abilities, and there are ways for different people to be good in different ways and contribute differently. But that doesn't mean there's no way to draw a consensus about what it means to be good at hockey, or to be the best. When you talk about the GOAT of hockey, the greatest of all time, you're talking about Wayne Gretzky, and his track record proves it. You don't even need to understand hockey to understand he basically owns the record books for the sport, but if you do, you know that what made him the GOAT went well beyond just shooting well. He knew the game inside and out, and fundamentally shifted not only what it meant to be good at hockey, but what kind of a game hockey should be in terms of like what skills are being tested. Like, okay, in hockey, you get points on your personal record for goals scored as well as for goals assisted, meaning that you either pass the puck to the guy who scored, or you pass the puck to the guy who passed the puck to the guy who scored. Wayne Gretzky has the record for the most points in the NHL for a lifetime career at 2,857 points. Now, even if you removed every single goal he had personally scored, every time a puck went from his stick into the net, he would still have more points just from his 1,963 assists than the second highest point scorer, Jaromir Jagr, I'm not saying that right, I'm so sorry, has across both goals and assists. Importantly for context, Jagr has played 1,733 games in the NHL, the fourth most of all time. Wayne Gretzky only played 1,487, putting him at 24th. All of this is to say that when it comes to hockey, it's possible to know what a good hockey player looks like, to know what a bad hockey player looks like, and to know what the best hockey player looks like, and quantify it. But why? Well, in large part, it's because there aren't that many variables that play outside of the player's control, and so hockey becomes much more capable of actually serving as a skill check for the relevant skills. I've brought up Drag Race a few times, I apologize, Mirage's performance is stuck in my mind, I'm not going to be forgetting it anytime soon.
I'm not that nice and I'm not your sis.
One of the flaws in that show as a competition is that it's very resource dependent. A contestant with more money coming into the competition has a major advantage because they can produce better runways, have higher quality products for makeup and wigs and all that, and are less likely to get placed in the bottom because producers will want to keep her on so that they can keep on, posting on social media about all these fantastic looks. Also, producers get to decide who wins. There's no objective measure of who's good or bad, and they've certainly made choices in the past that reflect a preference for being entertaining over being a rigid competition. This is something that's inherent to any competition involving human judgment for any number of reasons. Famously, Crystal LeBeja went on an iconic rant about drag pageantry judging being racist in the 1960s that you can see in the documentary The Queen. You can also see this sort of thing in like figure skating, gymnastics, synchronized swimming, anything that has a human judge. Hell, even in sports where there is like an objective measure of who wins and loses, there's still room for human judgment and human error through referees and umpires calling penalties where maybe it was on the fence, or calling it out when it should have been safe, or anything like that. Anything with more moving parts than a game of chess is gonna have room for human error and variables outside of the player's control, but you need as few of those variables as possible that are up in the air if you want something to be a meaningful competition, and the variables that do exist need to be in the control of the competitors as much as possible so it can be a skill test for them, whether that's a mechanical skill test, social skill test, intellectual skill test, strategic, whatever. Overwatch and other games like it don't have consistent skill checks because it doesn't even have a consistent inherent victory condition from one mode to the next. What it means to win King of the Hill is fundamentally different than what it means to win Payload, or Push, or Flashpoint. The rules change, the arenas change, and you might win or lose based entirely on factors outside of anyone's control, because sometimes just one team or one player is better or worse at a certain map or mode than their counterpart. And look, if this was a consistent thing, fine. Again, we can make the comparison to biathlon and triathlon. Lots of people who do triathlon aren't the best at running, but they make up for it in swimming. The problem is that it isn't a consistent thing in Overwatch. You're not getting to try each map, each mode to really see where you fall. You're only getting one shot at it based on a lot of randomized conditions that are way too hard to control for. Are you good at Overwatch based on your performance on Sojourn with a Mercy Pocket on Junkertown? What about your performance in a Widowmaker duel on that same map? What about that same Widowmaker duel, but on King's Row? Even within an Overwatch map, the skill test can change dramatically from point to point when it becomes close range, long range, very messy, whatever. And maybe you have the skills necessary for points 1 and 3 of Nimbani, but you suck at point 2, so you only get 1 point total. The other team might suck ass at point 3, but that doesn't matter because they can secure point 2, so they win. Again, it's not inherently bad to require some variety, but there is way too much variety with too little consistency and too little to predict and work around for this to be a serious competitive game. The title of this video is Competitive Hero Shooters Were a Mistake, and I think the point I want to hammer home is that this genre of gaming is too big, too broad, too dynamic, and too inconsistent to make it a competitive game. Games that succeed as esports are games that strike a balance and, importantly, have some consistency. Having a single map or a single mode across a handful of maps is a huge factor in making it possible for a game to actually be a consistent skill check from match to match, rather than just being like, well, fuck, we're on Ilios, guess we're gonna just lose because I suck at this map and or the heroes who are good on this map. Having unique characters can definitely be done, but it needs to be done carefully, or you risk creating the mercy problem where people can look at them and think it takes no skill to play them well because they have no understanding of how the hero works, and it's just so fundamentally different to how they play the game that they can't recognize it. This is especially true when you're not just creating distinct characters, but distinct roles, and having role lock, role queue, because all you're doing there is you're making it even harder, even more siloed in terms of what one player is doing and what another player is doing. This is also, again, not about saying Overwatch is bad. Overwatch is fun. People enjoy it. I enjoy it. People even enjoy playing ranked sometimes, or so I've heard. A lot of these factors that I've talked about as issues with the competitive environment are things that make it fun as a game. I don't want Overwatch to try and streamline itself to become an esport. I don't want it to lose the crazy shit, and I don't want it to lose that random chance. That's part of the fun. I just want it to stop pretending it can be a serious competitive game, much less a formalized esport, when that's just not what it is. We can try and create a competition out of it, because people are good at making literally anything into a competition, and that's not inherently bad. But if the goal is to create a game that is either 1, primarily based around competitive ranked play at a high level, or 2, the basis for a mainstream esports phenomenon, then Overwatch is the wrong game for it. It just isn't gonna work that that way. It's not that kind of game. Overwatch is never going to be her. It's never going to be hockey, never going to be football, never going to be baseball, basketball, soccer, anything of the sort. It's not going to be golf. It's not going to be darts. It's not going to be chess. It's not going to be poker. It's not going to be Drag Race. It's not going to be Survivor. It's not going to be League of Legends. It's not going to be Valorant. It's not going to be CSGO. Even by the standards of other hero shooters or other games that are similar in certain ways, Overwatch is uniquely ill-equipped to be this serious competitive game because it's honestly just Calvin Ball, a made-up game with fake rules that constantly change where the end goal is more about having fun than to be a serious competition. And you know what? That's fine. You don't have to be able to validate your hobbies by giving it the veneer of a serious, sincere competition. You can play Overwatch for the same reason people sew garments, or cook nice meals, or play crokinole with their families, or make YouTube videos. Because it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's something you can be good at in a way that maybe isn't best understood through the lens of formalized, sincere competition. I think a big part of the issue with video games, specifically in this context, is there's this desire, kind of a desperate desire, to turn everything into an esport when it just doesn't need to be, because there's a belief that playing a game that is an esport means that it's a game with more gravity, more meaning, more validity, but it just isn't. It doesn't make a game a more valid thing to spend time on just because someone else on the other side of the world might be winning a prize pool for it. Just, like, enjoy your silly hobbies, play your silly little video games, and understand that it doesn't have to have a world championship broadcast on ESPN to be worth playing. This is a good game in a lot of ways, but maybe we just need to stop pretending it's something it's not and focus on enjoying it for what it is. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member. For $5 a month, channel members get to vote for the topic of one video per month from me, and the video you just watched was their choice for January. The February poll is going to include a few returning topics from previous months. There's ELO Hell or Why We Cope. There's how video games distort people's perceptions of real-world resources, and there's just say magic exists in Overwatch. However, it'll also include a couple new ones that I'm very excited for. The first of those is the toxic sword of Damocles in ranked Overwatch, and the second is what is Overwatch supposed to be? No thumbnails for those new ones yet. I've got to cook a bit. I got to make them appropriately bad for my channel, but they're going to be fun topics for sure. Thank you very much to all my channel members. MiniQ, Olesp, Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Nemo the Survivor, Destiny, Connor, Yoshi of the Wire, It's Peggy BTW, PatLover192, Sourdough, Illuma Riley, Venus, Monkey12 Ninja, Cadence, Windex the Great, V, DeLeathers, and Marsh Alice. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or you just checked out this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.